It began with destiny and prophecy, and it ended with silence. Amazon's The Wheel of Time promised to be one of the most ambitious fantasy shows of the streaming era, an adaptation of a sprawling 14-book epic that inspired millions. And yet, after just 3 seasons, the wheel stopped turning. With Season 4 officially canceled, fans are left asking, how did this happen? Why now? And does this truly mean the end? Here's an in-depth look at the hidden forces behind the show's untimely cancellation, and what it reveals about the current state of fantasy storytelling. The heavy burden of high expectations. From the moment it was announced, The Wheel of Time carried enormous weight. Not only was it adapting a beloved, complex series, it was Amazon's first major foray into prestige fantasy. It was expected to set the stage for the Rings of Power, proving that the studio could handle vast lore, ensemble casts, and global storytelling. And at first, it seemed to succeed. The first season became one of the most watched debuts on Prime Video, and the franchise's fans finally had reason to celebrate. But with that success came pressure. Wheel of Time was held to standards few other shows had to meet. It had to satisfy hardcore readers, win over casual fantasy fans, justify its cost, and deliver consistent buzz, all at once. That kind of pressure warps expectations. Every decision, every deviation from the books, every lull in pacing was scrutinized. The show didn't just need to be good, it needed to be a cultural moment, and in today's streaming landscape, that bar keeps rising. And moving. Missed opportunities in audience building. Of all the factors contributing to the Wheel of Time's cancellation, perhaps the most frustrating is how much of it had nothing to do with the show itself, and everything to do with what happened around the show. Fantasy doesn't just live or die based on its scripts or effects. It survives through fandoms, through communities of people who carry the world forward between seasons, who create, debate, gather, and evangelize. And that's where Wheel of Time was quietly, devastatingly failed. Series like Game of Thrones weren't just popular because of dragons and drama. They became cultural phenomena because HBO invested in building a community. They released behind-the-scenes features after every episode. They encouraged fan theories, spotlighted content creators, and embraced the lore deep dives that kept discussions alive between episodes. The Witcher, The Expanse, and Shadow and Bone followed similar paths. They nurtured their audiences as much as their plots. Amazon didn't do that with Wheel of Time. Despite pouring millions into production, creating stunning visuals, casting top-tier talent, and faithfully adapting much of Jordan's intricate world, they undercut that work with a flat, impersonal online presence. There were no regular live events, no character-centric social media campaigns, no aggressive outreach to fan creators, no presence at major fantasy conventions with tailored panels, and in the streaming age, that silence is fatal. The show's YouTube page, Twitter/X feed, and Instagram were inconsistent, offering generic promotions instead of immersive engagement. There was little attempt to teach newcomers about the world's deep lore, or to let longtime readers celebrate seeing their favorite prophecies and characters realized. Fans felt talked at, not spoken with, and over time, that gap became a chasm. Had Amazon leaned into fan interaction, releasing behind-the-scenes diaries, letting the cast host lore sessions, producing high-quality recap explainers or companion podcasts, it could have sparked the same ongoing buzz that keeps other genre shows alive in between seasons. Instead, the digital silence gave the impression that Wheel of Time was a show to watch, not a world to join. In an age where fandom is everything, the Wheel of Time was left to stand alone, and that was never how this story was meant to live. Season 1 sparked curiosity but lost momentum. While the premiere season was largely considered a success, it faced issues that would echo into later seasons. Viewers new to the series found themselves overwhelmed by unfamiliar terminology and rapid exposition. Book readers, meanwhile, were split on the show's creative choices, including character compressions and major lore changes. Amazon chose to release the first 3 episodes at once, aiming for instant engagement. But this strategy may have backfired slightly. Without weekly episode build-up, water cooler buzz faded fast. The show's blend of mystery and lore didn't land the way Game of Thrones once did, and while viewership numbers were good, they weren't great. More importantly, The Wheel of Time didn't become the flagship phenomenon Amazon needed it to be. And in the age of ruthless content culling, solid isn't always enough. Season 2 built better, but quietly. Despite a solid viewership base, Season 2 launched with far less marketing than its predecessor. The show improved in many ways. More confident pacing, clearer stakes, and deeper performances. But without a strong promotional push, it didn't generate significant mainstream momentum. Rosamund Pike continued to anchor the show with gravitas, and breakout performances from characters like Nynaeve and Ishamael gave the season emotional heft. But in the shadow of the Rings of Power, another Amazon-backed behemoth, the Wheel of Time was left to carve its place without the same resources or hype. The problem wasn't quality, it was visibility. Amazon seemed to shift its fantasy spotlight elsewhere, and in an ecosystem dominated by weekly trending cycles, that shift spelt trouble. Season 3 found its soul. By Season 3, the Wheel of Time had found its stride. The storytelling tightened, the characters matured, the dialogue shed its earlier stiffness. Critics responded with glowing reviews. An impressive 97% on Rotten Tomatoes testified to the creative leap. Showrunner Rafe Judkins' vision was finally crystallizing, and viewers who stuck around were rewarded with layered arcs and long-awaited payoffs. But in terms of industry momentum, Season 3 came at a strange time. Amazon was quietly re-evaluating its streaming strategy, and big-budget shows were being judged more harshly than ever on their immediate performance. Despite the critical praise, The Wheel of Time dropped off Nielsen's top 10 faster than Amazon likely expected. The tragedy here isn't just that a show got better, it's that it got better right before the axe fell. If Season 3 had been Season 1, we might be telling a different story. But in the streaming age, patience is a luxury few platforms afford. The cost of high fantasy on a tight leash. Fantasy costs more. That's a simple truth. From sweeping CGI landscapes to intricate costumes, magical combat sequences, and multiple filming locations, The Wheel of Time had a notoriously expensive production model. That cost was justified, at first, by the promise of long-term growth and franchise potential. But with Amazon already pouring billions into the Rings of Power, the studio began cutting where it could. Executives began looking at numbers over narratives. If a show didn't pull in massive, sustained global viewership, it became vulnerable. Even a modest decline in watch time was enough to raise red flags for something so costly. Season 3 may have been cheaper than Season 1, but it still wasn't cheap. And as streaming services face greater scrutiny from investors, even well-received shows can fall victim to bottom-line thinking. Wheel of Time became a victim not of failure, but of fiscal recalibration. Creative liberties divided the core fandom. No adaptation escapes controversy, but The Wheel of Time walked into battle wearing heavy armor made of expectations. Some creative decisions, like compressing character arcs, altering timelines, or shifting lore, were necessary for TV structure. But others, like rewriting major beats or sidelining fan-favorite scenes, felt dissonant to longtime readers. This divide never fully healed. The fandom split into two camps: those who accepted the show as a reinterpretation, and those who saw it as a betrayal of Jordan's vision. Amazon never seemed to directly address this fracture, hoping it would smooth over with time. It didn't. And when viewership softened, this division was easy to point to. Some fans who felt burned by early seasons never returned, and that slow erosion in engagement hurt the show's long-term numbers, even as quality improved. The shadow of the Rings of Power. It's impossible to discuss Wheel of Time's fate without addressing the towering presence of the Rings of Power. Amazon's Tolkien adaptation was not only the company's most expensive TV investment, it was its fantasy priority. In terms of marketing, resources, and executive attention, the Rings of Power consumed the spotlight. That left the Wheel of Time in an awkward position. It was no longer the fantasy project at Amazon, it was the other one. And while Rings drew from the cultural cloud of Tolkien, Wheel relied more on active engagement and critical support. With fewer promo pushes and less press attention, it gradually slipped from the mainstream conversation. In many ways, Wheel suffered from being first. It paved the way for high fantasy on Amazon. but was quietly sidelined once the bigger name took center stage. The streaming wars leave no room for slow burn. In the 2000s, shows were allowed to grow. Breaking Bad didn't become a cultural phenomenon until season 4. Game of Thrones stumbled in its early days, but in 2025, shows must hit hard fast or die. Streaming platforms are less interested in long-term development and more obsessed with instant metrics. How many started watching? How many finished the season? Did it trend? Did it go viral? Was there rewatch value? The Wheel of Time was a slow burn story. Its value was in patience, payoff, and deep world-building. But that doesn't match the industry's current model. Amazon's decision reflects a broader industry shift. The end of slow and steady wins the race. And that's tragic, for creators and fans alike. Can the wheel turn again? All is not lost. In fact, the Wheel of Time still has paths forward. Streaming shows have come back from cancellation before: The Expanse, Lucifer, Community. The key is mobilized, visible fan support. Already, Save Wheel of Time is gaining traction. Fans are signing petitions, launching campaigns, and writing open letters to Amazon, Netflix, and other potential adopters. The source material remains beloved. The cast, especially Rosamund Pike and Daniel Henney, remain passionate. And the show's growing critical reputation could make it attractive to a network willing to bet on prestige fantasy with a loyal base. Even if another streamer doesn't revive it, there are options. A final miniseries, an animated adaptation to conclude the story, or a feature-length film focusing on the last battle. What's crucial is that Amazon hears the message. This story matters, and it isn't finished. Final thoughts. The wheel turned, and for a moment, it stopped. Season 4 is cancelled. The studio has moved on. But the Wheel of Time, the story, the world, the characters will not vanish. Because it was never just about episodes. It was about transformation. It was about characters finding strength, not in prophecy, but in choice. It was about balance, rebirth, and the long arc of struggle toward meaning. This is not the end. Not for Rand, not for Egwene, not for Moraine, not for us, the pattern phrase. But it always reweaves. And if there's one truth that echoes through the ages, it's this. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the Wheel of Time. But it was an ending.